Hi, I'm Michael Clinton, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
We're going to start off this conversation with a roar. Actually, we're going to take it throughout the whole conversation. Roar into the second half of your life before it's too late is the book by Michael Clinton, and he is the guest on today's program. We talk about the importance of knowing that when you go into the second half of your life, that it's not the end of it. We get into a lot of conversations around that. This is a conversation that happened a couple of months back. We're releasing it today. I went back and revisited the episode as I was preparing the show notes, and I have to say it's a great conversation. It's one that should definitely be something that you pay attention to, no matter what phase of life you're in, because you want to make sure that you roar into the second half of your life. And Michael has plenty of stories and experiences that he shares during our conversation and in the book that'll help you do that. So without further ado, here is my productive conversation with Michael Clinton. I love talking to people who have the same name as me because it just, I already know right out of the gate that we're going to have at least one thing in common. So Michael, thanks for joining me today on the program.
Thanks so much, Mike. And it's good to know that my family does not call me Mike. They call me Michael. So we now know we're differentiated.
We do. I only get called Michael when I'm in trouble.
There you go.
And the middle name gets thrown in there as well.
Maybe that's how it stuck for me over the
years. Well, now that we've established you're a troublemaker, this book may be a troublemaking one for some people because they may not be necessarily, they may be ready for it, but they're like, oh, I don't know. There's some people really hesitate around the idea of roaring or even going into the second half of your life because they're so used to the way things have been. When you put this book together, Roar into the second half of your life before it's too late, was that one of the things that you were taking into account? Like there are some people that are very hesitant and or dismissive of the notion that, hey, you know what, maybe I should be doing this thing that I should have always been doing or that I've really wanted to do.
Yeah, well, the big wake-up call that I had, which led to the book, is that, if you're 50 and healthy today, you have a really good shot of living to be 90, even 100. And so all of this notion of, when I'm in my 50s or I hit 60, my life is not a long runway, is all changing. And so it's creating this awakening with people that they can have a second or third career, a new relationship, a new lifestyle. And that seems to be giving a big stimulus for people to think about. I'm not going to be able to sit there and play golf for 25 years, the proverbial golf game. And so I think it is. There's a big awakening happening. And in the book, I interviewed 40 individuals who, in fact, made the decision to pivot and change, and talk about how they do it.
One of the things that came up as I was going through the book was this idea that you promoted somebody near when you were in your role at Hearst, right? When you're at Hearst, because that was the role that you had before. She was 70, if I remember correctly. Was she 70 years old? Can you tell that story a little bit? I don't want you to reveal all the stories in the book because the book, there's a lot of great stuff in here. But that one was like, because that's inside of a corporate environment where people are like, first off, you should be gone. Like once you hit a certain age, not even retirement age, but there's an age where it's like, okay, this is where you are and this is where you stay. You bucked that trend, and so did this individual.
Yeah, for sure. As I was president and publishing director of Hearst magazines, and I had an executive who you're alluding to, who was phenomenal. I never looked at her, through her age lens. She was a contributor, she was a performer, she was innovative, she was all of those things. And so before I stepped out of the day-to-day, I promoted her and gave her a larger portfolio. And I think what we're going to see happen, and there's a lot being written about this right now, is, the talk of a 60-year work career that we're all going to have and how we're going to be working longer. Some of us because of financial needs, some of us because of a desire to stay engaged and involved in our main career. So I think as time goes on, those 60s and 70-year-olds who are staying in their profession, it's not going to become so unusual. Corporations, HR, all of those folks are going to have to get on board because it's the people who are going to drive this. It's not going to be the institutions. The people are going to demand this, quite frankly, in terms of their own lives.
Well, and that's the thing. The institutions will follow because they'll have no choice. That's the thing, is unless you put the pressure on, unless there's enough people professing it. You know, I've talked to Rich Karlgaard before about this. He wrote the book Late Bloomers, fantastic book. We'll link to that episode in the show notes. And my buddy Steve Dotto, who was, he's based in Vancouver, he was on TV and he kind of like, he's embracing what he calls the gray wave. And he's leaning harder into that as well, as he's gone from television to YouTube to like just embracing a lot of technology. So as it's interesting because the boomer, like my parents are boomers, I'm a Gen Xer. I can tell the difference between the people who are like just leaning into this idea of roaring in versus those that aren't. And I know some people that aren't, that are just like, they're bored out of their minds. And it's because, I don't know, were we sold a bill of goods that was like, you work until, you know, you're 65 and then you can do whatever you want. But by the time you're 65 or you're retired, you're like, I'm not capable of doing what I wanted because not enough money. I'm now a bit more, you know, beat up than I was when I was younger. Is that a generational thing that is? Well, I'd love to lean into that a little bit before we start to actually break down the acronym of ROAR.
Yeah, thanks. I guess gaslight is the word that comes up to my mind when you talk about, you know, this is what you're supposed to be doing when you're 60 or 65 or 70. I'll draw an analogy almost to, I'm going back to the 70s, to the women's movement, when women created lots of different role models for young women. And I think the boomers are going to create a lot of different role models, not just for their peers, but for the Gen Xers and the next generation. You know, I'm hoping that today's 35-year-old can look at a 65, 70-year-old reimagineer, is what I call them, and say, wow, that's an option for me. You know, I don't have to go live this quote unquote retired script that I was handed. I can go and start a business, become an entrepreneur, you know, go run a marathon at 65. I want new role models. And I think the boomers, of which I'm one, you know, we like to shake it up. We always have. And I think our new platform is shaking up what second half can look like. So I think there's got a lot happening on that front.
You mentioned Reimagineer, and that's going to lean right nicely into and dovetail nicely into the idea of what ROAR stands for. So can we, first off, let's break it down. And then I want to get into some, as you go through the books, there's some tips, and there's a couple of them that I definitely want to allude to. And they may not necessarily all happen in order of the book because I want people to go pick up the book. But if we can break it down a little bit so that people have a sense of, okay, so if I'm going to roar into the second half of my life, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted this to be a book that people could completely understand and relate to. So it's a combination of aspiration and very practical guidance for people, let's call it 35 to 55 or even 60. And, you know, it is really targeted to the professional class, you know, knowledge workers, you know, people who are aspiring in their lives and striving. So the acronym is Reimagine Your Life Before Someone Else Does It For You, because, you know, we all know what's going on with, you know, downsizing and natural disasters, et cetera. What is your favorite future? And the first R is really the tools to help you shape that. The O is own your stuff. I mean, own your numbers, own your health numbers, own your financial numbers, where you are right now, own where you come from, and take a really hard look at where you are right now. And where is it that you want to pivot? Where is it that you feel that you need to have a reimagination in your life? The A is the action plan. One of my favorite chapters is all about life layering, which is a technique that I've used now for over 25 years as a life philosophy, which is a very meaningful chapter because, you know, we all tend to define ourselves by our professional seat. And this is a process to build other personas and identities so that you're not defining yourself by what you do, but rather who you are. And the final R is reassess your relationships, because those people around you, especially if you're, let's call it 40, and you're married or you're not married, you have kids, you may not have kids, but your close-ins, your partner, your spouse, your kids, your family, your whatever, are the really the ones who are going to help you facilitate to move your life forward. And that also includes your work people, and that includes your community. So the relationship piece of this is really important mechanism to help you move forward. That's the simple definition.
And they all intertwine. Like, I mean, that's one of the things I noticed as I was going through the book is the idea that the relationships things goes back to ownership, right? Like they're like everything kind of interacts and intermingles. One thing so the first tip that I actually not only dog-eared, and people know that when I do this, I dog-ear and I make notes and all that stuff, is one of the Roar tips was we need to be in a constant state of reimagining, thinking through the next phase of every aspect of our lives. You could start that process at any time. If you're committed to true change, why not reimagine yourself before someone or something reimagines your life for you, which I think is great. Seth Godin's alluded to this too in the idea of the linchpin and things like that. Like there's some elements of this that, I mean, what I love about books like this is that they put everything together. And again, the life layering thing we're definitely going to get into because there's some really cool stuff there. But I actually wrote down with that tip, how do you stay present while still doing this reimagining? Because I think what can happen is people can go too far one way. They can get so bogged down in the present, they go, oh, this isn't possible. Or they could get so flight of fancy and so they're like, oh, I'm going to be here. And then they forget about, oh, wait a minute, this right here, right now, I'm going to need to deal with this. So what's the balance there? How does someone stay present, but yet still put themselves in the state of reimagineering?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I think reimagination and reimagining needs to be a lifelong philosophy and approach. And when you integrate that into your constant way of thinking, I ask people when they're 85, what's your favorite future? I ask people when they're 25, what's your favorite future? It is a constant process. One of the things, because everyday life gets in the way, as you say, and sometimes it's hard to think about what will be next. I always suggest that people pick one thing to focus on. The big takeaway for me in all these interviews is that it took people 1 to 2 years to really do the work to identify where they wanted to reimagine and then they had to get their head there first, then they had to build the practical steps, then they almost had to build a parallel track to their present life before they could actually make the pivot and make the change.
It's almost like they have the main story arc of their lives, but then they have this backstory that the subplot. Right. That takes time to, interestingly enough, Michael, just sidebar, is that as a comic book geek, and people know this if they've seen my stuff before, the Moon Knight series is coming out and people are like, why wouldn't they make it into a movie? I'm like, that character is so layered. The movie would have to be 7 hours to get all of the nuance. So similarly, like this kind of thing, when you say like 1 to 2 years, from what I gathered, it was, focused attention for the 1 to 2 years, but then it doesn't stop. Like that's the other thing too, right?
Right. Well, because you go through different life stages. Mm-hmm. I mean, when your kids are gone, that's a whole life stage right there. And, if you had children when you were 25 and all of a sudden you're 45 and you're becoming an empty nester, you're going to have another 45 years ahead of you. So you've done all those child rearing. And then, you're going to have your core relationship, and let's hope that continues. But what if it doesn't? And then you might be, we all know people who find themselves widowed, divorced, etc. at 60. And, there's a reinvention there. And, it is a constant process because life events evolve and change us, and we have to adapt. One of the analogies I love to use is how we've all had to adapt to technology. You had to do it. You had no choice. You had to do it. So it's the same kind of thing, adapting to your circumstances and where can they take you.
So as I moved into the second part of the book where we talk about ownership, like the owning piece, one of the other tips that stood out was your personal ambition and passion should be what drives you. So what if you put on a back burner that's getting a lot hotter? We hear a lot about back burner. Like, I'm gonna put this on the back burner. We've there's this great David Sedaris has this great essay called Hey Kookaburra, I think it's Hey Kookaburra, I believe, if I remember, where it's like, you have the different, and you only have 4 places on the stove that you can use and everything else. But no one talks about the back burner stuff getting hotter. It's just put that on the back burner. It's as if the back burner's off, like it's like we have a range upstairs and the kettle that sits on the off burner, and it's just there. That's where you keep it, and you turn it on when you need it. And you turn. So, what are some of the signals that you've had yourself or through your interviews where people were like, oh, that back burner thing, it's getting hotter. Because I think that's one thing people fail to recognize is, oh, this thing that was on the back burner, it's the kettle's boiled dry. I let it sit, and now it's so hot that I have to bring it to the forefront.
Yeah, I'll answer that two ways. One is one of my favorite stories in the book, interviews was with a woman who was a sales executive for many different industries, and she was married with two kids, and she'd always wanted to be a writer, and it was really what her back burner topic was. And she finally, in her 50s, around 55, 56, decided she was going to really focus on this. It was part of that 1 to 2 year thing. And she took courses, and she took master class with Dan Brown. She wanted to be a mystery writer. She went to some conferences, et cetera, et cetera. To make a long story short, she wrote a novel. She said she had 170 rejections, and she gulped, and she stayed with it. And she finally got her first novel published at 62. She's now 66. She's written 5 novels. She now calls herself a novelist, and she brought it back from the back burner to the front burner. And I think one of the lessons there is go back to your younger self. What is it that you left on the shelf, on the back burner in your younger self that brought you excitement and passion and interest, but you got sidetracked because you were told that you should be practical and get an accounting degree instead of being an anthropologist, and et cetera. The second way I'll answer that is I was very happy and proud to be one of the folks who launched Oprah Winfrey's magazine, the Oprah magazine. And the one thing that I always loved what Oprah said was, you have this little voice in the back of your head, and it starts getting louder and louder and louder. And you can try to ignore it, but that voice is going to wake you up at 2 a.m. That's back burner stuff where that you've got to really address something that's in your life, and or that may be one of the things that you gave up a long time ago that you need to bring back.
Sidebar real quick. If you're listening to this right now and you haven't listened to Oprah Winfrey and Brene Brown talk about Brene's latest book, Atlas of the Heart, on Oprah's podcast, it's on I think it's Spotify exclusive, but you should. It was, I've seen Oprah's conversations, Super Soul Sundays with Gretchen Rubin, who I've had the pleasure of chatting with before. And her and Brene just have this great chemistry. It's fantastic. And Brene's book, Atlas of the Heart, is something I'm currently reading as we're recording this. And it's another way. I think that there's actually some stuff that you could tie in from Atlas of the Heart that will help you deal with some of the stuff that you're going to be having to go through in the process you're going through with Roar, right?
Yeah. No, Brene's a wonderful, an amazing, inspirational speaker and writer. And I've had the pleasure of meeting her as well.
Let's move on to an element of layering. She talks about the layering of emotions in the Atlas of the Heart and the different roles and the unexpected things that can be related. When I was going through the book and I got to the life layering piece, I'm like, hold up, what's this? Because I love it when you think you've been doing something, or you think you have a sense of it, and then, as much as we don't like labels, when something gets defined for you, or it crystallizes or clarifies it for you, it's like, oh, this is what this is a piece that's missing, or this is the permission I've been waiting for, right? Like either or of the. And when I saw the Act Now with Life Layering, that was a thing that I think people who get caught up in like, I need to do as much as possible, if they start to lean into life layering, they get to do that, but without all of the pressure that they feel comes with this productive posturing that comes with it. First off, I'd love to hear your take on that, but also lean in and dive into a little bit about what life layering is and maybe what it isn't, because I think some people can go too far with it too, right?
Yeah. Well, let me start with my own personal story, which was when I was 39 years old, I was the publisher of GQ. I had been the youngest publisher in the industry. I'd been the publisher for 5 years. Great job. I had a great family life, but I had this epiphany that I was a very boring human being because all I was doing was working, and I needed to, as they say, get a life. So on a business trip coming home on a flight, I decided I was going to tap into my adventure self. I have a lot of adventure streak in me. and made the decision to take a flying lesson and go climb Mount Kilimanjaro to celebrate my 40th birthday. And that led to what I'll call my first life layer, in that I decided my 40s were going to be my adventure years. And so I made it a point once a year minimally to take an adventure trip with a group of, family or friends. And we picked a place every year, and we've climbed mountains all over the world, and we skied and we've hiked and we've done all sorts of fun things. And that layer, which is now, over, 25 years, has become an extremely rich part of my self-definition. My most recent thing is I ran 7 marathons on 7 continents, including obviously a marathon in Antarctica, which is how I celebrated my 60th birthday. And so that layer was on top of my career and my family life. But to your point, you don't have to jam it all into one year to check a box. This should be something that you want to take on for your whole life. So in my 50s, I tapped into my creative layer. I really focused on my photography. I ended up publishing 8 books of my photography. I had a publisher who was just kept churning me out, and had photography shows, et cetera. And so my creative layer, and the thing about creativity, whatever your creative passion is, there's no timestamp on it. Mm-hmm. You can be a photographer to the end of your days. You can be a writer. You can be a sculptor. You can pick your creative passion. So ultimately what happens is you get this big, fat, delicious layer cake that you're building in a life, and one doesn't replace the other. It's always additive to. You just have to identify what's important to you. For me, it was adventure travel. It was photography. It was marathoning. It was philanthropy. And so getting back to the earlier discussion, when I stepped out of my day-to-day seat at Hearst, which was a very terrific seat as the president and publishing director, that self-definition was only one small part of my layer cake.
Right.
And so, a lot of people, when they step out of their profession, they go off the cliff because they have not cultivated other things. And so I like to say, start now. Start if you're 25. Start if you're 35. Start if you're 55. It doesn't matter. Just build a layer and stick with it. And that's what life layering is. It isn't, a quick jab of like, okay, I'm going to take a photography course and then I'm not going to do it. Boom, in and out. Really think about focusing on it and developing it, no pun intended, over, a long arc of your life.
Well, and I think one of the things that I noticed as I was reading the book is the enthusiasm throughout. Like there was just I didn't read, let's put it this way. As I went through the book, I'm like, he's how old? What has he done? Like, it just, there was this, and again, I think there's a preconceived notion about, ageism is a thing and people have this sense of, if you're at this age, that's it, you're done. And what fascinates me is someone said to me, like, what are you going to do when you're done writing? Like, cause I'm a writer first and foremost as well. Like, I'm going to be dead probably. Like I'm a writer. That's what I do. And they're like, well, will you always write? I'm like, no, I don't know what but I've been a writer since I was, in grade 6, and I'm going to keep doing that because I love doing it. But I also make films, and I also did comedy, and I also, and I think you're right. I think people, again, there is this idea of being doing productive instead of being productive. Like I talk about this is like, yeah. And you mentioned about like layering life and things that are lifelong pursuits. I think what some people get caught up in too, and this leans in nicely to the tail end of Roar, is lifelong friendships. And there are some for sure. And technology has allowed friendships that may have not stayed or stood the test of time to either be rekindled or have that happen. I mean, Facebook has been wonderful for that in a lot of ways. There are other ways where it's not been so wonderful. But one of the things that I appreciated as I went through the book was, because Roar is starts with an R and ends with an R. You put relationships at the end. I think that was very clever, and I don't know if it was by design or by default, because I think you can't reimagine before you figure relationships out, because sometimes the relationships can hold you back. That's been one of the things that I've struggled with too, is, I mean, the best man at my wedding, we don't talk anymore. which is, and the only time I see him is the photo on the wall. And there used to be longer, lingering moments of, but those moments have gotten fewer and further between because we're different people now. So can you touch on the relationship piece? First off, I'm imagining it was by design and not by default, the way the years are set up. And then how important is it for people not only to embrace relationships and try to cultivate them, but to be okay with letting go of ones that are, frankly, they've reached their end?
Well, you hit a great nerve. And yes, it was by design, because ultimately all of the things we talk about in the book can't happen unless those around you are the wind beneath your wings, as they say. The thing about my business, in the magazine business, is we have a very important word called editing. And you know that as a writer, and you have to edit your life as well with the people who have become toxic, the people who are no longer supportive of you for whatever reason. There might be jealousy involved. There might be you grew separate parts. I mean, I too have many, really long lasting relationships that I had to end. Both, by the way, family too. Mm-hmm. It's just not friends. And I think surrounding yourself by the people who are going to facilitate you and support you and be honest with you and who you can be vulnerable with is incredibly important in this journey. And that happens throughout our lives. I also like to say simultaneously, listen, I was on CBS Morning News. I was interviewed by Gayle King, and Gayle asked me the pointed question. So, Michael, how old are you? And I said, Gayle, I'm 68, and 68 is the new 68. Let's stop saying that 60 is the new 40. And she laughed and she said, I'm 66. And so it's the same thing. And we're the role models, I hope. But the key is that when you're in your 60s or your 50s, you should have friends who are in their 20s and in their 30s, and friends in their 80s and in their 90s, because it brings you perspective and it brings you thought. And I want to know what 20-somethings think. I mean, I want to do it. I want to do it on their head. I don't want to do it in my head. And so reverse mentoring is important. I have a few 20-somethings who are my mentors. And so I think this notion, and you can develop new relationships at any point in your life. You just have to be open to it and, hopefully find the people. My best friend in the world right now is somebody who I met in my early 50s. And, this is a fellow marathoner and we're best friends, and we travel together. He's part of the adventure group, and we are brothers from another mother. And so I'm really lucky to have met, this friend in my 50s. So stay open to the possibilities.
And it's funny. I think I remember reading a story about Charlie Munger hanging out with somebody, like he was at a beach or something like that. He was working on his computer. He had somebody that was like in their 20s, and he's like that. I've made friends with this person because they know more about this than me, and they're learning from me. I'm learning from them. I think that it's such an amazing world that we live in now, where because of the pursuits that we're all capable of, that most people can, but I don't want to be too general. Yeah. But that the capabilities that are there allow, and the opportunities allow for this kind of thing to happen. One of the things that as we get close to wrapping up here, in this book, I think the wisdom that's in here can be appreciated again and again, because there's an awareness and a perspective shift that happened as I went through. I mean, you're looking at this right now. You could see the dog ears that. There are a lot of amazing points in here, and I think that as we wrap up, if someone was to look at the book and walk away from this episode, they pick up the book, but they want to get started now. They're like, I want to get going now. Michael, what can I do what's the first step I can take to start to roar into this second half, third, fourth half of whatever half or quarter or fraction of the life that they're in?
Yeah, well, you can't do it all at once, even though I did interview a woman who decided to have a complete year of change in every aspect of her life. And wow. And she told her story. But I say, pick the one thing. Pick one thing, start there. If it's, to get healthy and fit and live that kind of healthy life, then decide what that's going to be and how you're going to get there. There's a great story of a woman who lost 100 pounds, and she tells her story in the book. If it is to change your career, if it is to get out of a bad relationship or marriage, if it is to get out of a city or town, pick the one thing that has been gnawing at you and really spend the time to take a deep dive into it, to dissect why is it and what is it that you want to do to fix that. And the book gives you lots of tales and lots of tools to be able to go in the process. But you have to start first by identifying what it is that you want to change or you want to reimagine.
The book is called Roar into the Second Half of Your Life Before It's Too Late. Michael Clinton, thanks for joining me on the program today. Where can people keep up with you and the stuff that you are doing nowadays?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. First of all, the book's, print, Audible, I read the book, Kindle, roarbymichaelclinton.com. We are launching a monthly newsletter, which will then lead into some coursework and some Zoom sessions and live sessions, ultimately, around the topic. Listen, this is a topic that is, by 2030, 1 in 5 Americans is going to be 65 or older. And there is this huge bulge of people who are going to rewrite the script as to what it means to, I like to say, live longer, not get older. Mm-hmm. And so this is a topic that's not just going to be with the boomers, but has huge impact for people in their 40s and 30s and even 20s, because those 20-somethings, they're going to be in a minority in terms of the age population when, over the next 20 years. They're going to be, with declining birth rates and an aging population, these 20-somethings, it's going to have a lot of impact on their life in lots of different ways. So they need to be a part of the conversation to find the right solutions and balance for all of us, and ultimately for them when they're in their 70s and 80s. So we're going to talk a lot about that in the Roar platform.
Mike, thanks for that. Michael, see, you're not in trouble with me.
Notice I didn't call you Michael.
I know. Thanks for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thanks, Mike. I loved it. Thank you.
Thanks to Michael for joining me on the program today. And again, Michael has so much experience, and it shows, not just throughout the conversation, but throughout the book. And you want to pick up the book, don't forget to check out all the links worth exploring. And you can do that at productivityist.com/podcast423. Pick up the book as well. Okay, so don't forget to do that. Again, that's productivityist.com/podcast423. Visit there right now, but subscribe to the podcast first if you're not already a subscriber. So hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, wherever you're listening to this. That way you don't miss a single episode of what's to come. And next time around, I'm joined by Neil Williams. That's another conversation that's been months in the making, and I'm looking forward to bringing it to you. I'm also looking forward to having you check out some of our sponsors, the ones you listened to today in particular during our conversation. If you want to make that happen, go to productivityist.com/podcast sponsors, and you can do that now as well. And there's lots of great sponsors that have supported the show during this episode, so don't miss out on that. Again, productivityist.com/podcast sponsors. You can also click on the link in the show notes as well. That's it for this episode of A Productive Conversation. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.